Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most monumental, completely contradictory, and just fiercely debated figures in all of history, Peter the Great. We're going to explore how one man's singular, relentless obsession fundamentally transformed the massive nation of Russia, essentially dragging it, sometimes kicking and screaming, right onto the world stage. We'll be weighing his absolutely incredible achievements against the truly brutal methods he used to secure them. So, let's get into it.
The sheer absurdity of this scenario is just the perfect place to start. I want you to imagine a man who is roughly 6 foot 8 inches tall, covered in sawdust and sweat, swinging an axe as a common carpenter in a Dutch shipyard. Now realize that this man isn't a laborer at all, he is the absolute unquestioned ruler of all of Russia. It sounds completely unbelievable, right? But this is a totally factual snapshot of Peter's life. To understand exactly how a Tsar ends up doing manual labor in Western Europe, we really have to look back at the chaos that forged him.
Section 1. The Giant Takes Power. A chaotic succession.
You see, Peter's path to the throne was anything but smooth. Back in 1682, his older half-brother Fyodor died without an heir, and what followed was a vicious, messy succession crisis. Peter initially ruled jointly with his half-brother Ivan V, while his half-sister Sophia acted as regent and actually held the real power. But here is the absolutely critical part for us to remember. During this power struggle, Peter witnessed a bloody rebellion by the Streltsy. They were Russia's elite military corps. He literally saw his own relatives and friends violently murdered right in front of him. Now, he eventually overthrew Sophia in 1689 and became sole ruler by 1696, but that early trauma, it left Peter with a profound, lifelong distrust of traditional Russian politics and the elite class in Moscow.
So Peter's life was really defined by this stark contrast. On one hand, you have his traditional, stifling, royal upbringing, which was heavily rooted in Russian orthodoxy and Kremlin politics. And as we just saw, he deeply associated that world with danger and betrayal. On the flip side, we have his ultimate escape, the German quarter in Moscow. Here, Peter became completely obsessed with foreign experts, mathematics, geometry, sailing, you name it. He befriended Dutch carpenters and foreign military men. He honestly wasn't interested in the old Muscovite ways at all. He wanted to know how ships were built and how modern artillery worked. This massive divide totally set the stage for everything he'd do next.
Section 2. The Incognito Emperor. The Grand Embassy.
So Peter decided to travel incognito under the fake name Pyotr Mikhailov. His plan was to avoid all those tedious diplomatic events and just focus entirely on learning. But there was one massive problem. Literally. He was a towering 6 feet 8 inches tall. People actually described him as a second Goliath. I mean, in the 17th century, a guy of that height traveling with a massive Russian entourage couldn't exactly blend into the crowd. His incognito status was basically an open secret everywhere he went.
The crucial takeaway here is that Peter wasn't just taking some lavish royal vacation, not at all. He was a relentless, almost obsessive student. He actually apprenticed as a ship carpenter in Zaandam. He studied anatomy, figured out how to pull teeth, studied military fortifications, and even learned how to preserve butterflies and make watches. He really got his hands dirty learning this truly bizarre, eclectic mix of trades, all because he believed this kind of practical knowledge was the absolute key to modernizing his nation.
Section 3. Dragged into the Future. A Cultural Revolution.
When Peter got back, the sheer scale of the shock to the system he delivered was unprecedented. I mean, he abolished the traditional Boyar Duma and created a modern governing Senate. He completely threw out the old Russian calendar, which counted years from the creation of the world, and aligned Russia with the Julian calendar. He personally designed a new, simplified civil alphabet. He even went as far as banning traditional Russian clothing, like the long kaftans, literally forcing his courtiers into European-style dress. He was essentially rewriting the entire operating system of Russian society almost overnight.
Now, to really understand why Peter moves so aggressively, you have to understand exactly how he viewed his own people, and this quote captures it perfectly. He saw the Russian populace as rude, unintelligent, stubborn in their sluggishness, a child, a lazy student. Because of this view, Peter believed the state was a universal tool. He firmly believed that to transform his subjects into educated, useful citizens, he had to use absolute authority and, if necessary, a whole lot of violence and fear.
To anchor this massive kind of abstract concept of westernization, let's look at one highly specific, fascinating detail from our sources: 100 rubles. You see, in Russia, wearing a long beard was a deeply held religious and cultural tradition. Well, Peter, fresh from the West, absolutely hated the beards. So what did he do? He instituted a beard tax. If a nobleman absolutely insisted on keeping his traditional beard, he had to pay an exorbitant annual tax of 100 rubles for a special token that proved he had paid for the right to remain unshaven. It was literally putting a price tag on tradition.
Section 4. War and Empire. Becoming a maritime superpower.
This ambition to become a maritime power sparked the Great Northern War against the Swedish Empire. Now, Peter's forces were initially really ill-prepared, and they suffered a disastrous, crushing defeat at Narva in 1700. But Peter was not the kind of guy to quit. He used the time to literally melt down church bells for cannons and completely rebuild his army. By 1703, he founded his new capital, Saint Petersburg, right on conquered swampland. And his resilience paid off with a stunning, decisive victory over the Swedish at Poltava in 1709. Finally, the Treaty of Nystad in 1721 officially ended the conflict. The spoils of that decades-long war were absolutely massive. Russia officially acquired Ingria, Estonia, Livonia, and a substantial portion of Karelia. Peter had finally successfully secured his highly coveted window to the west on the Baltic Sea. And following this huge victory, he was officially proclaimed Emperor of all Russia. The Russian Tsardom was no more. The Russian Empire had officially arrived on the scene.
Section 5. The Price of Progress. The Human Toll.
This brings us to what is perhaps the darkest contrast of his entire reign. On one hand, you have Peter opening the Academy of Sciences and funding public hospitals. Very enlightened stuff. But on the other hand, you have the tragic fate of his own son, Alexei. Alexei was suspected of plotting to overthrow the emperor. So under Peter's watch, the secular court tried his son, and Alexei was tortured so brutally during questioning that he actually died in prison from his injuries. Peter literally sacrificed his own flesh and blood to protect the state he was building.
And that extreme ruthlessness really shapes how many view him today. Consider this perspective from historian Yevgeny Anisimov, who calls Peter the creator of the administrative command system and the true ancestor of Stalin. While Peter modernized the economy and the military, many historians point out that he also firmly established a violent, top-down, oppressive autocracy that would go on to plague the common people of Russia for centuries. He didn't just build ships and cities, he built a terrifyingly efficient police state.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question. We've seen the spectacular rise of the Russian Empire, from an isolated state to a true European powerhouse. But we've also seen the brutal suppression of its traditions and the incredible, violent cost of this forced modernization. So, you have to weigh the evidence for yourself. Was Peter the Great the brilliant architect of Russia's greatness, or was he the ruthless destroyer of its national culture? Think about that as you reflect on everything we've explored today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this sparks your curiosity to go learn even more.